What is going on, everyone? Welcome into Big Time Football Talk. So I wanted to touch on Jalen Carter, first of all. Jalen Carter, the talk of the NFL draft, where's he going to go? Is he going to slip out of the top 10? And it's funny how things are going full circle with Jalen Carter. Once upon a time, it wasn't too long ago, you were hearing teams were taking him off their draft boards. Is he going to fall out of the top 10? Is it going to be a free fall? Is it going to be one of those awkward things where they keep showing him on draft day, looking a little, disgruntled? But now you're hearing that, teams view him as the top prospect in over a decade. You're hearing that, maybe Pittsburgh trades up for him tonight. I'm anxious to watch. Real Sports Talk on HBO is going to interview Jalen Carter. They're going to sit down with him and his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, and discuss the situation that happened January 15th that involved his teammate and others getting in that car crash, and then, Jalen Carter getting in trouble for speeding, drag racing. So really just anxious to see where Jalen Carter goes. And, like I touched on, does he go to my Detroit Lions at 6? Is Seattle the lock at 5? It seems like that's the name everyone throws out there, where Jalen Carter's most likely to go to Seattle at 5. But, if you talk about just on the field, Jalen Carter, just a monster. Grown man strength, ability to just engage blockers and just throw blockers off them like they're nothing. There's really, that's been harped on repeatedly. There's no question about this guy's on the field game. Best prospect in over a decade. You could say that. I think there's definitely a case for that. If you're going to touch on probably the next best defensive prospect, you're probably talking about Von Miller back in the 2011 draft. Patrick Peterson was also in that draft. You're talking about those were two, elite talents as far as physical traits and for what they did for their respective teams. But Jalen Carter, I'm going to go down a list of interesting players in this draft. Jalen Carter is certainly an interesting player because, it seems like he's a lock in the top 10. That's what his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, is harping on, that he's going to be a lock to go in the top 10. Just which team will take him in the top 10 is the question mark, And, Rosenhaus's agent guaranteed that he won't slip out of the top 10. So it'd be interesting to see what he does tonight or what he says tonight in this full interview. Sounds like teams have asked him about the incident. It sounds like they have not really, pressed on and really just poked to get more information about it. They've just, it's been like a casual question, and they wanted him to just tell his side of the story. Also, I'll touch on Peter King. Is talking about the Houston Texans, and he is, it sounds like from what he's hearing that the Texans might take Tyree Wilson at number 2. Tyree Wilson, if you've watched my channel recently, I love the guy. I think he's a stud, beast, monster. I think he's going to have a great career. This is, kind of a case of DeMeco Ryans wanting to get his Nick Bosa, is what everyone's is saying. And, some people do think that it is a smokescreen that they are going to take C.J. Stroud at 2, but Houston Texans have now, through all the rumors, have become definitely a team to watch here at number 2, as it seems like Bryce Young's become more of the lock at number 1 to go to Carolina. Interesting players. The first guy is Bryan Bresee out of Clemson. So Bryan Bresee, if you fast forward, or if you rewind back to 2020, I know a lot of people don't want to go back to 2020 necessarily, but for this purpose, let's go back to 2020. So Bresee, number 1 recruit out of high school, comes into Clemson, has a really nice season in 2020, and plays on a team that goes to the playoff. Bresee, battles through a lot of injuries. Rattles through multiple injuries at Clemson. Loses his sister, sadly, to cancer. And it also has a kidney infection. So this guy that goes through a lot of adversity. After having it seemed like was a pretty smooth high school career where he became the number 1 ranked player, and you saw him just physically dominate high school kids for years. But Yeah, Bryan Bresee. There's talks that his pad level is a little high, too high at times. Struggled in the Tennessee game against Darnell Wright, but Darnell Wright considered by a lot the top tackle prospect, if not the top tackle, the top 3 in this draft. But Bresee, well, he seems a little bit raw just because he hasn't played a lot of football. This is a guy that just, looks the part and also plays the part. Tested off the charts, a guy who, he looks like a man playing amongst midgets at times. And, people brought it up, who does this guy compare to? I'm not really sure if there's, one guy he compares to, but just to me, he's a guy that can kind of make his own, create his own path and be kind of like a unique, really good skill set in that, someday if there's a guy like a massive, super athletic dude like Bresee who's powerful, can hold his ground like Bresee does, then maybe people will compare that player to Bryan Bresee. But yeah, I think Bresee's interesting because once upon a time, he was, before heading into this season, when people are talking about who are the top draft prospects for this NFL draft, Bryan Bresee was right up there. And most people had him as a consensus number 2 defensive tackle. Now he's like the number 3, 4, kind of behind Kalijah Kancey out of Pitt. So, and was considered a top 10 to 15 pick. Now he's kind of in the 20 to 30 range somewhere, maybe even slips to the second round. I think he goes first round. If I was willing to put money on it, I would bet that Bryan Bresee does go first round just because someone is going to want to bet on the traits, bet on the size, bet on some of the high-end plays that you saw from Bryan Bresee from Clemson. So really like Bryan Bresee, really like his unique skill set, the athleticism he has, and some of the elements to his game, the pass rush, the ability to stunt as a guy who's 6'5", 300 pounds, the side to side movement, it's all very good from Bryan Bresee. Definitely makes my interesting players list, and I mean this in a good way. It definitely makes this list, and it's certainly a guy to watch come draft night, especially in the first round. Next guy is Luke Van Ness from Iowa. So Luke Van Ness, kind of the opposite of Bryan Bresee, was a guy that was not getting really, if you go back a couple months ago, a guy that wasn't getting too much, first round buzz. It was kind of back then, a couple months ago, was a shock just to see him at the end of the first round. This is a guy that kind of reminds me of George Karlaftis last year. No one really has this guy as the top edge rusher, but he's consistently like most people's like number 2, 3, 4 edge rusher. And this is a guy that's, going to go somewhere middle to late first round with probably his ceiling being like number 8 to Atlanta. I would be surprised if he goes higher than 8, but it seems like, mock drafts even as of recently have him going like in the 8 to 12 range. But yeah, this is a guy that he's now my number 2 edge rusher, and I love the power he plays with. This game's all about power. But he's a better athlete than he gets credit for. Not a guy that's super twitched up, super flexible, but just a darn good football player. And he was a guy that was on the field for Iowa. He definitely made a huge impact on that Iowa defense. Put a lot of pressure on opposing offense, whether he was rushing the quarterback, disrupting run plays, holding his ground versus double teams, or just chasing down ball carriers. So the next guy, safety Brian Branch. Brian Branch doesn't get enough talk in this NFL draft, kind of because this is a weaker safety class, which is weird because it seems like safety is a position that does get a lot of hype, but Brian Branch not necessarily getting a lot of talk. But this is a guy that, I'll say this, he's an elite tackler. I watched 3 games. I can't remember exactly which 3 games I watched if it's all 22 tape, but it's a guy that just does not miss tackles. Plays the star position for Alabama. Nick Saban. If you're a guy that plays the star position at Alabama, you better be able to, cover and tackle. And Brian Branch does those 2 things well. Has a nice, has fluid movements. Only ran 4.58. Like people have talked. If you saw like a 4.4, if you saw the number 4 after the decimal point in his 40 time, this is a guy that probably would be getting top 10 consideration, but he plays faster than 4.58. A guy that's just a darn good football player. Consistent, was a key part of the success of the Alabama defense. And even though Alabama was, down this year by their standards, if every game you watched, Brian Branch was flying around, either making a key pass breakup, interception, or making a play in the backfield. Had a really good game against Kansas State in that bowl game. And I like Brian Branch. Like I said, elite tackler. This guy that he's gonna find a niche in the NFL, and he's gonna excel at something. Whether that role is deep safety, nickel corner, someone's gonna find a spot for Brian Branch, and he's an excellent football player out of Alabama. So the next guy's Kelee Ringo, corner out of Georgia. Like Brian Bresee, this was a guy that was one of the top recruits in the 2020 high school recruiting class. A guy that before this season was getting consideration as like maybe the top corner in this class. Does struggle with a little bit of the change of direction stuff. But you talk about size and straight line speed is the name of Ringo's game. He's going to be able to run and stay with bigger receivers who don't necessarily change direction super well. But yeah, like a guy that some people have him in their top 5 corner, but most it's like number 5. Like Chris Sims had him number 5, but some people have him out of their top 5 corner. I know he's my number 6, but it's a close 6. Like meaning he's very close to my my 4 and 5, Deonte Banks, and my number 5. But yeah, now he's like the 36th ranked player by NFL mock draft database. So basically, this website I found, you guys should check it out. It's a website just compiling just a compilation of mock drafts and does like an average of where players are going. So now Ringo's the number 36 player. And it seemed like once upon a time he was a top 10 to 15 player. I know Todd McShay had him as like a top 10 player going into this year. And he has slipped. But, I think the slip is mostly not that people – obviously, people do have some concerns with Ringo, but I think some of the slip is just due to people just liking other corners, and that's just being such a strong cornerback class overall. Next guy is Drew Sanders out of Arkansas. And I'll say this about Drew Sanders. He only came in as my number 5 linebacker. But why he's interesting is there's a lot of upside here. He's a little bit thinner of a frame. You got to believe that he can bulk up a little bit and play a little bit stronger in the NFL. I wish this guy played with a little bit more recklessness, and he's struggles to diagnose plays overall. But part of that, I think, is him transitioning from a rush outside linebacker to more of a true off-ball linebacker like he played this year at Arkansas. This is a guy that transferred from Alabama. Like the two guys, like Bresee, Ringo was one of the top recruits in the 2020 class. A guy that still has the ability to rush the passer, whether he's standing up in a 2-point stance or he's rushing through the A or B gap. But, a guy that can shed blockers, take on interior blockers, like I said, doesn't do it recklessly. He doesn't really do it at a high level, but he can do it. So there's not really necessarily anything Drew Sanders can't do, but you want to see him, bulk up, mature, diagnose plays better, and just continue to grow as a football player if you want him to reach his, upside that he has. Another guy, DJ Turner out of Michigan. DJ Turner, 4.26 at the combine. You saw last year, as a Michigan fan, you saw DJ Turner emerge as one of the best players on the Michigan defense. In 2021 last year was a key part of why they won the Big Ten championship and why they played at a high level throughout that season. This is a guy that, the speed shows up on tape. Chris Sims was a guy that put this guy on a lot of people's radar, having him number 3 corner. He's my number. He's also my number 3 corner, I believe. He's a guy that can turn and run with anyone. He's very competitive, good tackler, a guy that just has a knack for making plays. Did a pretty good job covering Marvin Harrison Jr. This past season. And, a guy that, what's crazy, Michigan, I guess I'm straying away from, the point, but a guy that kind of almost in Michigan, you could argue was maybe their second best corner because they got a young guy, Will Johnson, who I'll talk about on this channel, and will definitely be a name NFL draft fans or NFL fans will have on their radar for the draft in a couple of years. But yeah, they were getting a lot. Him and Mike Sanders still were getting a lot of buzz. The other two corners on Michigan, but DJ Turner still rock solid this year, even though I thought he had a better year in 2021. Still an interesting player, way lower on consensus draft boards than where I have him and Chris Sims have him. But a guy that, with his skill set does project well to the NFL and does have, some high upside, in my opinion. So the next guy is Ivan Pace Jr. Out of Cincinnati. Ivan Pace, my number one linebacker, which is a surprise to most because you don't even see this guy as a top 5 linebacker by most people's list. But the bottom line for Ivan Pace Jr., this is a guy that is just a relentless blitzer. Cincinnati asked him to blitz a ton because he could do it. Not only could he do it at a high level. Could track down ball carriers, close in on quarterbacks in a hurry. He's got good acceleration. This is a guy that reads plays reckless, does not give a crap about taking on guards, tackles. He'll just throw his body around. This is a guy that just an excellent playmaking linebacker for Cincinnati, and it was a key piece of why Cincinnati had so much success this year and last year when they made it to the playoffs in 21. But yeah, not, like I said, just not viewed very highly by most, which is just crazy. Like on the NFL mock draft database, I think his consensus ranking is like 145th overall. I think he's like the consensus 9 or 10 linebacker. It's just crazy. And, I think it's a shame people just see him as a blitzing linebacker because, his back pedal, his side-to-side movement is excellent. I think he can play coverage. What it comes down to with Ivan Pace, he's just a little undersized. I think he was 5'10", and a half. But he's got a pretty thick, lean, muscular build overall. Just an excellent football player, in my opinion. But, we'll see. We'll see where Pace goes because, the media's not high on him. We see how this goes. Maybe the NFL views him in a different light. And maybe he could be, when I put him next to Malcolm Rodriguez, a lot of the measurables were very similar to Malcolm Rodriguez. Not to say that it'll even be that good because Malcolm Rodriguez worked himself from a 6th-round pick to a starting linebacker and was one of the bright spots in the Detroit Lions defense, maybe arguably one of their best players on the Lions defense. So that's high praise for Ivan Pace Jr. with respect or with regards to how he's being viewed right now by the media. We'll see where the NFL views him. We'll see if he's a guy that maybe can slip. Man, you got to a second round would be a stretch. Maybe a guy that can slip in the 3rd round, and I think someone's getting themselves a steal. But, having him a number 1 linebacker where I would have him, I'd probably have him going early to mid-second round. Just even though I have a high grade on him, that size would concern me a little bit to have him slip. But, where the NFL views him, that'll be a different story. So, and then the last guy, Hendon Hooker. So, Hendon Hooker, you hear more and more buzz that he's going to go 1st round in this draft. That'll be very interesting to see what happens with Hendon Hooker. This is a guy that's, a little bit older. Some people not worried about the age. He's a guy that's coming off an ACL injury. A guy that people question, did he just thrive in the Josh Heupel system at Tennessee? Can he really have success at the NFL level running an NFL running an NFL offense and, going through more reads, and there's not just, receivers are stacked and there's a lot more, easier reads, more wide open guys because you have, more superior wide receiver talent. Even though, maybe Tennessee didn't necessarily have like superior talent to the SEC, I would say that, they did have Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, a couple guys that are going to get drafted, and Darnell Wright at tackle. So there definitely was enough NFL talent around Hendon Hooker for him to be successful this past season. But where he goes is still a mystery in this draft, and we'll see. Does a team that doesn't have does a team trade up to get him late in the 1st round? Does he even go somehow top 10? Does he go before the big four quarterbacks, Stroud, Levis, Richardson, Young. Most likely not before Bryce Young, but does he go before Levis or Richardson or Stroud? It's a question mark, and it's a question that's going to be answered here shortly. So I can't wait for the draft. It'll be next Thursday on ABC. Looking forward to it. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Big Time Football Talk. Make sure to stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace.